when Red Bull Racing rolled its first true 2026 car out at Imola for an initial shakedown. The expectation inside the garage was basic and unglamorous. Power up the systems, fire the engine, complete a few installation laps, and walk away with clean baseline data. That is what shakedowns are for. Instead, the car stayed inside the garage longer than planned because of a problem during the engine start procedure, forcing engineers to halt the run, reset processes, and reassess parts of a power unit program that now sits fully under Red Bull's responsibility for the first time in its history, alongside Ford. On paper, this looked trivial. No smoke, no stranded car, no visible failure. But in modern Formula One, especially at the dawn of a completely new regulatory cycle, small moments like this are rarely insignificant. This was not about lap time, because shakedowns are not about performance. It was about readiness, about whether hardware, software, and operational procedures actually work together when the car leaves the controlled environment of dynos and simulators and enters the real world. What makes this episode carry extra weight is that Red Bull is no longer refining or packaging someone else's engine. For the first time, the team owns the power unit outright. That means even a short delay during ignition is not just a hiccup. It is part of a steep and unfamiliar learning curve. It also sits awkwardly against Red Bull's reputation over the last decade as a team defined by smooth execution and near-flawless first outings whenever a new car appears. So the real question is not simply what went wrong, but what exactly was being tested, and how prepared Red Bull truly is for the complexity of the 2026 era. Is this just routine noise, or an early hint of deeper challenges? What followed at Imola was visually uneventful. There was no dramatic stoppage, no broken components on display, just a longer-than-expected pause while engineers worked through a startup issue on Red Bull's first in-house power unit. But under demonstration event rules, where teams are limited to just 15 kilometers of running, even small delays have consequences. A shakedown is normally a carefully structured exercise in system validation, not speed. Lose part of that window, and priorities shift from correlation runs to simply making sure the car can complete its installation laps cleanly. Red Bull did not publicly explain the cause, but available information confirms the issue occurred during the initial ignition sequence, not during on-track running. That distinction matters. It points away from durability under load and toward integration, calibration, or software sequencing problems. In modern Formula One, startup is one of the most complex phases of operation, especially with hybrid power units. Multiple control systems, safety thresholds, electrical components, and software layers all have to align before the internal combustion engine can even fire. This is where the wider significance lies. Red Bull is no longer operating a customer power unit designed and coded elsewhere. With Red Bull powertrains now responsible for the entire package, from combustion hardware to control logic, every layer of accountability sits in-house. Even a minor disruption during ignition therefore represents a category of challenge the team simply did not have to own in previous seasons. At the same test, Racing Bulls were also running their 2026 car for the first time, powered by the same Red Bull powertrains, Ford unit. Their day became more visible when rookie Arvid Lindblad spun into the gravel at the Villeneuve chicane in wet conditions, briefly interrupting the session. The team confirmed the car suffered little to no damage and that the incident was purely down to the slippery track surface, with the Carb 03 returning to the pits on a flatbed. But the more revealing parallel between the two garages was not Lindblad's spin. It was the shared reality of validating a brand new power unit in a brand new chassis under unfamiliar regulations. In both teams, engineers were focused on fundamentals that rarely make headlines: startup procedures, shutdown sequences, cooling behavior, electrical stability, and data integrity. These are the invisible foundations on which performance is built. That perspective was reinforced by Racing Bulls team principal Alan Permain, who spoke around the Imola running about how quickly cars are expected to evolve early in a new rule cycle. "The car we test in Barcelona will not be the car we take to Melbourne," he said, adding that significant updates are inevitable. He also highlighted the constant tension teams face between pushing development as late as possible for performance and still ensuring parts are ready in time, explaining that everything is geared toward performance even though compressed timelines increase risk. While Permain was mainly talking about chassis development, the same logic applies directly to power units. The later a team locks in its architecture and control strategies, the greater the potential performance upside, but the smaller the window for real-world validation. In 2026, where both chassis and engine regulations change simultaneously, that trade-off becomes brutal. This is why the delayed start at Imola is analytically more interesting than it looks. It does not suggest Red Bull's power unit concept is flawed, nor that reliability problems are imminent. But it does highlight where the steepest learning curves usually appear, at the intersection of software, electronics, mechanical systems, and operational procedures. These integration points are where theoretical designs first collide with reality, and where small weaknesses tend to surface before bigger ones do. Red Bull's reputation for operational excellence makes this moment stand out. Over the past decade, the team has been known not just for fast cars, but for clean, efficient execution when new machinery first hits the track. That reputation was built in an era where engine partners carried primary responsibility for power unit development, even if Red Bull exerted strong influence over packaging and integration. That structure has now changed fundamentally with Red Bull powertrains and Ford. The team has taken ownership of the most complex subsystem on the car, and that inevitably increases the risk profile of early running. It is also crucial to distinguish between different types of early-stage problems. A hardware failure under load points to structural weaknesses that may require redesign. Cooling issues imply packaging compromises. A startup issue, by contrast, usually points to calibration, sequencing, or control logic, areas often solved through software updates rather than major hardware changes. That does not make them insignificant. In a sport where power unit behavior is increasingly governed by software rather than purely mechanical output, system-level issues are just as critical to resolve. In that sense, the Imola delay almost certainly sits in the category of integration rather than fundamental mechanical failure. The fact that the car did eventually run, and that no further reliability issues were reported from the shakedown, supports that interpretation. But it still matters, because software robustness and procedural reliability now sit at the core of competitive performance, especially under 2026 regulations that place even greater emphasis on electrical deployment and energy management. Dyno testing cannot perfectly replicate the complexity of a full car installation. Real-world running introduces vibration, airflow patterns, electrical interference, and human operational workflows that models cannot fully capture. That is why first shakedowns so often reveal issues invisible in laboratory conditions, not because engineers miss something obvious, but because reality always introduces variables simulations cannot. From that perspective, encountering a startup issue at Imola may not only have been inevitable, but useful. It exposed a weakness at the earliest possible stage, when there is still time to respond without compromising race weekends. The real measure of its importance will not be the delay itself, but how effectively Red Bull responded, how quickly the root cause was identified, how robust the fix proved to be, and whether similar issues reappeared later in testing. This becomes even more compelling when viewed through the broader regulatory context. The 2026 overhaul reshapes both aerodynamic philosophy and power unit architecture, increasing electrical deployment, revising energy recovery systems, and introducing new fuel requirements. The resulting cars are far more tightly coupled machines, with subsystems that depend on each other in ways previous generations did not. In that environment, the margin for integration error shrinks dramatically, and the cost of unresolved software or procedural weaknesses grows. Red Bull is not alone in facing these challenges. Audi, Cadillac, and other manufacturers entering or expanding their roles under the new rules are navigating similar integration processes. But Red Bull's position is unique because it enters this phase as the sport's dominant force rather than as a newcomer trying to prove credibility. That amplifies scrutiny. Every visible glitch, no matter how small, is interpreted through the lens of whether Red Bull can sustain its competitive edge in an entirely new technical era. Yet that framing risks misunderstanding how development cycles actually work. Teams that dominate at the end of a regulation cycle are often those that endured the steepest learning curves at the beginning. Early friction forces engineers to confront weaknesses sooner, refine processes faster, and build more resilient systems. From that angle, the worst outcome for Red Bull would not have been a delayed start at Imola, but a flawless shakedown that masked deeper integration issues until much later. That idea aligns directly with Permain's comments about late-stage development pushing performance while compressing validation windows. The later you develop, the faster the car can be, but the risk rises. The same tension exists in power unit development. Maximize performance potential or maximize validation time. In 2026, teams are trying to do both at once. The Imola startup issue sits squarely in that tension. It does not tell us Red Bull's power unit is slow, unreliable, or fundamentally compromised, but it does show that integration challenges are real, margins are thin, and even the most operationally polished organizations cannot bypass the realities of systems engineering under radically new rules. It also reframes what a rookie phase looks like in modern Formula One. Red Bull is not a rookie team, but in the context of developing and running its own power unit, it effectively is. That does not imply incompetence or lack of resources. It means encountering categories of problems the team has not previously had to own. The learning curve is not about outright speed, but about how reliably the entire system functions under real-world conditions. Viewed through that lens, the Imola delay becomes less a blemish and more a snapshot of what the early stages of this transition actually look like. Quiet, technical, procedural, and easy to overlook unless you know where to look. It is a reminder that behind every lap time headline lies a complex infrastructure of systems and processes that must work flawlessly long before performance can even be judged. As Red Bull moves into the Barcelona test, the volume and quality of data will increase dramatically. Where Imola offered only a handful of laps, Barcelona will provide sustained running and genuine stress testing across a much wider operating envelope. That is where integration issues either fade into the background or begin to form patterns. And it is those patterns, not isolated shakedown moments, that will ultimately determine whether Red Bull's 2026 project delivers on its ambitions. For now, the delayed engine start at Imola remains what it objectively was, a minor problem that caused a brief delay and nothing more. But analytically, it carries disproportionate weight because of what it represents. It marks the first moment where Red Bull's in-house power unit program met the friction of reality, not through dramatic failure, but through a quiet procedural obstacle that had to be solved before the car could even leave the garage. So the real question is not whether Red Bull had a problem, but what kind of problem it was, how quickly it was resolved, and what it reveals about the scale of the challenge the team has taken on. Is this just routine noise in the development process, destined to be forgotten once competitive running begins, or the first subtle signal that Red Bull's transition into full manufacturer status under the 2026 rules will be more complex than many expect? More broadly, do moments like this actually tell us more about a team's future trajectory than the lap times that dominate preseason testing headlines?